Order the 5 April Planning Commission meeting. Mr. Holt, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers, who represents the Berkeley District, could not be with us this evening. Ms. Knoll.
Present.
Ms. Knoll represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Rose, who represents the Roberts District and is this year's vice chair, could not be with us this evening as well. Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Mr. Haldeman is an at-large member. Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Mr. Kropp.
Here.
Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District. And Mr. Polster.
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District and is chair of the commission. I'm Paul Holt, Director of Community Development and Planning for the county. It's my pleasure to serve as secretary to the commission. Sitting to my left this evening is Ms. Liz Parman, our Deputy County Attorney. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. The first item on our agenda is the public comment period. And these are topics not subject to a public hearing tonight, and speakers limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any speaker cards, Mr. Holt?
We do not.
Okay, so I will open and close the public comment period. The next item on our agenda is the report of the commissions. Ms. Knoll.
Mr. Chairman, the Development Review Committee met approximately 4 p.m. on March 29th, 2023. Committee members present were myself, Barbara Knoll, Rob Rose, Steve Rogers, and Frank Polster. Staff members present were Ellen Cook, Principal Planner, Josh Crump, Principal Planner, and Armani Franklin, Community Development Assistant. The committee considered Conceptual Plan 230019, a subdivision exception request for a parcel located at 3426 North Riverside Drive. The proposal seeks an exemption to Section 19-17 of the James City County Subdivision Ordinance, which requires all lots to have an on-site sewer disposal system. This exception request would allow a 3-lot subdivision that has all 3 septic systems located on one of the lots. 2 of the lots would not have an on-site sewage disposal systems. The committee and the applicant discussed the site layout, the characteristics of the property, and the location of the septic tanks. The committee's concern resided in the questions of whether the parcel owners would properly take care of the septic tanks and whether off-site septic systems could create conflicts between property owners. The committee also discussed the distance of the septic tank from the homes, how the type of soil located on some of the property would prevent the location of conventional septic systems, and whether there were options that would allow the applicant to meet the requirements for the location of the septic systems within their own parcels, such as different lot configurations or the use of alternative would be sand mound or similar septic systems. A motion was made to recommend approval of the exception with the condition that the Virginia Department of Health approve the septic system design. The motion did not pass by a vote of 1 for, 2 against, and 1 abstain. The committee also discussed Conceptual Plan 23-0013, a proposed shared driveway exception request to Section 19-73 of the James City County Subdivision Ordinance for an approved 5-lot subdivision at 3148, 3158, 3140, 3120, and 3154 Jolly Pond Road. The proposal seeks to permit direct access to Jolly Pond Road through existing frontage by removing the existing shared 25-foot egress and ingress easement and any notes prohibiting access to Jolly Pond Road for each lot. The committee and the applicant team discussed the site layout and traffic flow to the properties. The committee concluded that there was not enough information to determine a vote. Mr. Polster made a motion to defer this matter to April 19th, 2023. The committee voted to defer the matter to its April 19th meeting with a vote of 4-0.
Are there any questions for Ms. Knoll? Are there any questions for Ms. Knoll? I'm sorry, sir? It's quiet. Ah. Mr. Haldeman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the Policy Committee met on March 9th. The meeting came to order with all committee members present. Also present from staff were Ms. Case, Ms. Cook, Ms. Parman, and Ms. Parrish. Directed by a Board of Supervisors initiating resolution and prompted by numerous complaints from residents, the committee met to consider possible amendments regarding the use list of the limited business, LB, general business B1, limited business industrial M1, planned unit development PUD, mixed use MU, economic opportunity EO, and the residential planned community R4 districts to require that vape smoke shops and vape smoke lounges obtain a special use permit. Ms. Parrish reviewed the location of schools within each zoning district and relevant ordinances of other jurisdictions, including Williamsburg. She then presented draft changes to definitions in zoning ordinance 24-2 to exclude vape shops and vape smoke lounges from the definition of retail shops and to include them in their own respective definitions. The committee added hookah pipes and water pipes to the definition. She also presented draft changes to the use list, making smoke vape shops and smoke vape lounges specially permitted uses in the above-mentioned districts. The committee unanimously found that the draft changes meet the letter and spirit of the initiating resolution and recommended the Planning Commission recommend approval to the Board of Supervisors. The committee also recommends that the Planning Commission recommend that the special use permits for these purposes include a 3-year renewal condition, and that if an owner is convicted of a violation of state and federal laws concerning sales of these products to minors, the special use permit will be revoked. The committee also suggests that Director of Planning contact officials in York County to express concern about the availability of tobacco and cannabis products close to James City County schools. That's it for me.
Are there any questions for Mr. Haldeman? If not, I'm going to go back and open up the public comment period. Even though we didn't have any speaker cards, it is open for anybody in the audience that would like to speak on any topic other than what's going to be addressed on our agenda tonight. Is there anybody that would like to speak? Please. Please state your name and address, please.
Vivian Herbert, 141 Warehams Point in Kingsmill. At our PAC meeting last week, we were presented with a map that Escalante has given us as to what's going to be built between 5 and 6 on the river course. It states that there will be 90 townhomes, regular townhomes. There will be 39 luxury townhomes, giving 129. But on the map, one of our residents counted all those little buildings. They're 10 short. So we would like to know where they are going to put that extra 10. And this has to change the density. And we're sure that this is an omission of an oversight. But we need to know because this is being given to everyone in Kingsmill. Thank you very much. Can I give you a copy?
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? If not, I'll close the public comment period and we'll move on to our consent agenda. Now, the consent agenda is not intended to be anything controversial. Do I have any a motion or any items that a commissioner would like to pull?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just mention that any voice vote, I was not present for the March 1st meeting, so if I voted one way or the other on the other items, it would be excluding that March 1st minutes.
We'll do those separate then.
Okay.
Just so we can get that clear.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Haldeman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to respectfully request that we pull Development Review Committee Action Item C-23-0019, 3426 North Riverside Drive.
Okay, we'll pull that item. Is there any discussion on the part of the staff or the commissioners? Any discussion on the item?
I would like to discuss it. Is this the time to do it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Mr. Weissong, thank you for being here. I'm sorry to drag you in. If it weren't for me, you'd be home with your feet up, I know. But
My pleasure, no problem.
the DRC voted to recommend denial to this, if I'm not mistaken, and staff recommends denial as well for what I thought to be pretty good reasons. And so I didn't think this belonged on a consent agenda. We'd at least consider it separately. So Could you fill us in a little bit about why you recommend denial?
Sure. So anytime we have a subdivision exception request, which is essentially when an applicant wants to do something that's normally not allowed by the subdivision ordinance, we review that request against established criteria within the ordinance. And that criteria includes strict adherence to the ordinance requirement will cause substantial injustice or hardship. The facts upon which the request is based are unique to the property. And there's several other criteria that are there. And so essentially we compare what's being proposed to that criteria. And if it doesn't meet the criteria, we recommend against approving that. And that was the case in this instance.
Thank you.
Any other or discussion or questions for staff?
I just wanted to clarify. So if it's a family subdivision, does it remain permanently a family subdivision, or at some point can it convey to others outside the family?
I'd have to check. I believe it has to stay with the family, and they have to prove during the application process that each lot's being deeded to the respective property owner.
It's a minimum of 3 years. After that, they can turn around and sell it to whoever. It only has to stay with the family after the subdivision for 3 years from the date of approval.
One clarifying question going through the materials. I gather the property owners looked at alternatives to the conventional septic, whether it be the mound system or some other feature that would allow each residential parcel to have its own dedicated septic area, and that was determined to be not a feasible alternative. Is that right?
Well, I'd have to defer to the applicant on exactly what options they looked at. This is what they started with on the submittal for us to review.
Okay,
Yes,
and
sir.
that, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I was just curious. So what they came in with was the application to use a separate lot to handle the septic for all 3 of the other lots in the family subdivision.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right, thank you.
We do have the applicant here if you would like to hear an answer to that.
Just curious as to whether there were some feasible alternatives.
Please.
Good evening, Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources, 205 Bulliphants Boulevard, Williamsburg, Virginia. Yes, Mr. Croft, we had looked at, so the on-site, the lots could handle an on-site alternative system like a mound system. The overall goal of this project is not cost savings or anything. It's that in the rear of the lot, and one of the things we talked about at the DRC meeting was that there actually are, the good soil is 13 feet in the ground up on the backside, but the good sandy soil within this, shaped lot is up on the back, and so the applicant is trying to do a standard drain field in the back, so everything would be pumped to the back. There will be easements placed over the lot. That was another point at the DRC that we had a discussion over, was that, yes, the lots could be sold. This is a father and 2 sons, or family, 2 sons that want to build 3 houses on the lot, and those drain field, they would have permanent easements. So even though there's no plan to sell these, that for forever, everyone would have access to their drain field, even though it's in the back. There's an existing gravel drive up to the back. A pump truck and maintenance and everything could be accomplished on the back of those lots.
Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate that.
Yes. If I could, so who, will that last parcel then be owned by one of the 3, or is it going to be held in a separate entity? I mean, who's ultimately responsible, and if a septic system fails, is there, and I apologize, I didn't see it on the map, but are there 3 separate drain fields and 3 separate backup fields?
Correct. Yeah. So the 3 lots are kind of, they're all stacked on top of each other. All the drain fields will be on the last lot. It is an easement over that last lot, so it's not in a common area or anything like that. 11C will own the land. There'll be an easement over top per the health department requirements. Yes, there'll be a primary drain field. There'll be a reserve drain field. Another discussion point during the DRC was that the county actually now tracks these drain fields. And so you have to pump them. You have to prove they pump them. Otherwise, the county has different actions, as Mr. Polster pointed out during that meeting. So yeah. So yeah, it's just an easement over, so the property is owned by 11C with an easement for access, maintenance, fixing, and the health department has to sign off on that as well as sign off on the plat for this to move forward.
Right. So is it a prescriptive easement that's outlining the requirements? What I'm getting at is how do we avoid conflict down the road that 11C, who's
Agreed.
responsible
Yeah. So
for
one of the points I had during the DRC is it's just like this lot is also serviced by an ingress egress easement. So just like that road, the owner that actually owns the land that road is placed over, they couldn't put a fence across because there's legal documents that gives everyone who has access to that shared driveway to have access through there and legal recourse if they decided to say, hey, we want to build a wall across this driveway. They would say, no, here's that. So this would be the same thing. There would be a document that gives 11A saying, hey, you have an so 11A for example, has an easement across 11B for their force main all the way back to 11C. So there would be a legal document with an exhibit, which would actually just most likely reference our plat showing, hey, here's the easement and here's everything you're allowed to do. And it would be signed off of at the time and creation of the plat to ensure they can always do, from the pump on the lot through the force main all the way back to the drain field. Because it's not just the drain field area.
What I'm more concerned about is if I'm 11C and I own that lot, if 11A, say, conveyed to a third party down the line outside the family.
Yep.
What if does 11A have the requirement? Do 11A, 11B, and 11C have specific requirements outlined in that document that say they will maintain? Because how does 11C not become responsible for all three because he owns that lot, but 11A chooses not to maintain?
So that document has not been created yet. So we definitely could look at doing that. I think the discussion during the DRC was that so we could add a mechanism to that in that document, as well as the county tracks the drain field. So if you have a failing drain field and you don't pump it every 5 years, it's either 3 or 5 years, I don't remember off the top of my head, you have to provide that documentation to the county. And if that does not happen, just like BMPs, within subdivisions, letters start getting sent out in recourse. So we could look at adding something in that document to, give something to 11C, as well as, for 11A to transfer its property, the drain field needs to be in working order. If you're going to live there, you need a working drain field. So there's also just some inherent, you need a working drain field as, if you're going to occupy a property.
Right, but VDH is going to hold 11C responsible for the drain fields on the parcel, not...
Because it's the drain field for 11A and 11B, so it's within their easement. So it's not 11C's responsibility to ensure that 11A and 11B's drain field are functioning because they're within the easement for 11A and 11B, and it's in 11A's and B's interest to ensure their drain field is functioning for both to live there as well as to be in compliance with VDH and county policy.
I think for me, there's a missing link here because I don't see the obligation. I mean, if there's an ingress and egress easement, I get that. That means I can go in and I can go out. But I think that the applicant would need to have something more specific that says, as part of that easement, this is the responsibility and outline those to meet the VDH requirements. Otherwise, I don't think 11C is protected. So.
Yeah, and so we can, definitely can add that in with the, just like when the ingress egress with the shared maintenance, agreement and everything. I definitely think there's verbiage that could be added to ensure that 11C is protected.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
The feed from A and B to C crosses wetlands. Is that correct?
Yes, they'll have to be bored underneath. They're non-RPA wetlands. They're just the RPA is actually so 11A has to cross wetlands on 11B. That would be bored underneath so that there's no disturbance of those wetlands, as well as then there's an existing gravel drive from the shared driveway all the way to the back portion of this property. So the two lines would be buried underneath that drive. So it's existing impervious, existing disturbed area and will not, and there's an existing culvert on 11C before you get up to the back. So there'll be no wetland disturbance or RPA requirement. The applicant is here as well, if you would like to hear from him.
I think the point for me was when I tried to chat with the stormwater folks on this, because they're the ones that manage the 4,000 plus sewage drain fields, is that they do actually have a mechanism and an address. So when it came down to it, it's the 11A, 11B, 11C that are on the hook as owners and are legally responsible to it. So what's been happening now that we have a database to track all of these, you can send not only letters out, but like our BMPs, once those letters get to nowhere, they get turned over to the county attorney for them to take action on that. And that's a change from what we've ever done in the way we've managed any of these drainage fields or sewer systems within the county. Barb?
Mr. Polster, yeah, at our meeting, we discussed a lot of things, and one of my concerns was, and you know that too, for sure, was one of the things that I was, is it on? One of the things I was concerned about is if whoever owns 11C at some point goes to sell it or buy it, I would not buy a property that had 3 septic systems on it. That's just my personal opinion. But also, 11C, they don't have complete use of their land too, and that was a big parcel. They can't even build a fence across it. They can't do anything across the drain fields. Correct.
So that's correct. They could
That is
not.
correct.
So they could, but we're talking about 19 acres in
I
these
know.
drain fields. If you see the map, which I don't know if staff has that available for this evening, but the drain fields are a very small portion of that back. So even if 11C still wanted to build their house way far in the back of their property, there's an existing gravel drive and everything. So we're talking about a very, small area. And the only other thing I would like to say is that, when we look at family subdivisions, there's not necessarily an asterisk next to them that says, well, in the future, they might not be a family subdivision or owned by the family. So the reason there's family exceptions and everything is to be able to let families utilize their land. So that's just one.
And my other point was that you can do a sand mound on each one, and each person can have their own drain field, which.
And correct. Yeah.
Correct.
So the overall goal of these is to have conventional drain fields in the rear of the lots. There is no money benefit to this due to you either have to trench a force main, all the way to the back and have, septic tank, all of that, or you have an engineered mound system on the property. So it is to have a conventional leach field on, and not the mound system with the not as good soil in the front of the property.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the applicant or for staff? At this point, we're going to take a voice vote on the 2 minutes, and then we will do a roll call vote on the DRC item. So can I hear a motion for the first minutes to approve?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now, can I have a minute? I'm
And
sorry.
for purposes of the record, you'll
I
abstain?
abstain.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, for the second set of minutes for the March 20th, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
For the Development Review Committee action item C230019, 3426 North Riverview Drive, do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend to the, no, we're not making, it doesn't go any further, right?
Commission's the
Excuse me.
final vote, so it
I
would
beg
be
your
your
pardon.
motion.
I would like to make a motion that we deny application C-23-0019, 3426 North Riverside Drive subdivision exception request.
You have a motion.
And just to clarify, a yes vote would be in support of the denial, a no vote would be to not support the denial. Mr. Crop?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
No.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
And Mr. Polster?
No.
Motion carries.
Okay, so now moving on to our first public hearing, SUP 230024, Chickahominy Riverfront Park Master Plan Amendment. Ms. Yates, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. Mr. Alistair Perkinson, Parks Administrator for the Parks and Recreation Department, has submitted a request to amend Special Use Permit Case Number SUP-0014-2009 to formally update the Chickahominy Riverfront Parks board-adopted master plan dated September 2020. Furthermore, this SUP application includes an updated master plan for Chickahominy Riverfront Park dated January 2023. The subject property is located at 1350 John Tyler Highway, zoned PL Public Lands, classified as Community Character Conservation, Open Space, or Recreation on the 2045 Comprehensive Plan, and located outside the primary service area. In formally amending this SUP and adopting a revised master plan, staff finds the proposed conditions will mitigate impacts to surrounding properties. Also, staff finds that the proposal is compatible with surrounding zoning and development and is generally consistent with the 2045 Comprehensive Plan and zoning ordinance. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application to the Board of Supervisors, subject to the proposed conditions. Thank you for your time this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and in addition, Mr. Carnifax is available to you as well.
Any questions of staff or the applicant? Mr. Alderman.
Good evening.
Good evening.
A friend of mine asked me to ask you if there's going to be a facility for launching kayaks.
There's going to be 2 in total, but that is proposed.
Thank you. And could you just discuss briefly the parcel set aside for the water treatment plant?
I'm happy to have Mr. Carnifax speak to that, if available.
He doesn't want to. I was going to jump in, but go for it first. Sorry.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. Yes, as you know, there's a long-term or potential plan for the county in the future if there's a need to provide their own water supply. There's no immediate plans to do that. They've applied for a permit, and part of that permit was to have a location that DEQ and others could see, and so there's an identified site on there if the county ever needed to secure their own water.
Any other questions for the applicant or for staff? If not, I will open the public hearing, and since we have no applicant, we have one speaker card, Mr. Chris Henderson.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Chris Henderson, 101 Keystone. It would be really helpful to have a schematic diagram of the actual changes that are proposed to the master plan when we're having a public hearing, so that the public could be informed as to the specifics of the changes rather than just an aerial of an outline of the area. As a frequent user of Chickahominy River Park, there is great need there for permanent boat storage. There's also a great need for boat storage in the James City County area generally. There's a lack of land available in close proximity to our launching points. And so there's some opportunities there potentially to lease land to an owner of what would be a boat storage facility rather than developing large parking lots for surface storage of boats, as I understand is proposed by the current plan. That would be more environmentally sensitive, particularly given the wetlands that are there and the potential withdrawal of water for drinking purposes in that area, rather than having to deal with the extensive amount of runoff coming from a 100-space parking lot for boats. So I would throw that out as one possible consideration. Another thing that would be really helpful for boaters along that area is to try to locate a fueling facility that could be had in the area so that boaters don't have to take the Chickahominy all the way up to Charles City and the Blue Heron restaurant and that marina there, which is about 10 miles or so upriver. And if you've got a bigger boat and you can't navigate under the Colonial Parkway bridge at Powhatan Creek there, just coming out of the Jamestown Marina, then you're forced to go about 10 miles out of your way past Jamestown Island and back up Powhatan Creek in order to fuel. So that would be another public service that the county could make available to boaters and residents of James City County. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, I will close the public comment and open it up for discussion with commissioners. Any comments?
I think what Mr. Henderson just said is correct. I mean, I think that's a great idea, and it should maybe be looked into at some point, because we looked at it, and there's 110 parking spaces, right? That we're putting in, 110 parking spaces. It says removing camping. So how many camping spaces are being removed?
Is that a question that you would like
It's
to
a
answer?
question, yeah.
Can the applicant come up? Could you rephrase the question for the applicant?
Yes, sir, how many camping spaces are being removed?
None.
Okay,
none.
because it says removing in the,
Yeah.
okay.
So that area R is the boat RV storage area that you see there in the gray. There's no campsites back there. We've relocated some existing campsites to other areas, and we're, we just entered into, are in the process of entering into an agreement with a company to put in the glamping sites at some of our electric sites out there to try that for a few years, because that's very popular. So yeah, we're not relocating or losing any sites for the RV or boat storage facility. And to address Mr. Henderson, yeah, we've talked to some private interested parties about a dry stack storage out there, even a fueling station. So I think that's something that could happen. The original person that we talked to, it ran into a cost thing, because as you know, that's a community character corridor, and you're going to build a large metal building for dry stack storage. There's a lot of improvements and screenings and some other things. So I think what Mr. Henderson is saying is something we would continue to look at, but it's just finding the right location and being able to put that out there on the site and not have the negative impact is going to be the challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Before you leave, the parking lot R, what's the surface going to be? It's not asphalt, is it?
Oh, it's gravel
That's what I thought. Thank you.
and stormwater-related infrastructure to support that, yeah.
Any other questions or discussion on the item? I just wanted to make two comments. I think when we looked at this, both in the CIP and in the DRC, there were two issues that I thought were worthwhile talking about. One was Mr. Haldeman's, that there's going to be some paving of some trails and things like that, not only here, but in the upper county. And so where possible, to try to combine both of those. And I think Mr. Perkins agreed that we'd take a look at it. The other one at the DRC was a safety issue where people are coming off of the bridge from 5 into Williamsburg. And you know where the only entrance in and out of that park is right there. And I'm sorry to say this, but people have a tendency to ignore what's the traffic to their right-hand side. So one of the suggestions I think Mr. Perkins was talking about was rerouting that bike trail off of the bridge into the park and have it come out. And I thought that was also a decent safety issue to bring up. Having said that, do I have a motion from the commissioners on the SUP for the Chickahominy Riverfront Park?
Motion to approve Chickahominy Riverfront Park, special use permit master plan amendment.
Let me just, because these are a little bit unique, you'll, for this item and for the other 3 parks ones, you'll note in your packet, we actually have a corresponding resolution as well, finding these public facilities in accordance with the comprehensive plan. Unless Liz advises, Ms. Parman advises otherwise, I'd like to suggest we take a roll call vote and motion on that resolution first, and then vote on the SUP. Okay.
All right, so can I have a motion on the resolution first, please?
I'm sorry, just to clarify, the resolutions for all the master plans, or just
We'll
the?
do one for each
One
one,
for each,
so
okay.
we'll have 4. So there'll be 2 votes on each of these next couple of cases.
So for SUP 23-0004, I would recommend that we find this consistent with the comp plan.
Approval of the resolution
And
is
approval
noted.
of the resolution is noted.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay, Mr. Holt, we have a motion on the floor.
we do. Mr. Croft,
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman,
Aye.
Ms. Knoll,
Aye.
and Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, the next item on our,
If we could now take the act on
sorry.
Mr. Kropp's motion to recommend approval of the SUP with the motion, with the conditions as included in the packet. Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
And Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Thank you, motion carries.
Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, SUP 23005 Jamestown Beach Event Park Master Plan Amendment. Mr. Lobhocker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Mr. Alistair Perkinson, Parks Administrator for the Parks and Recreation Department, has submitted a request to amend Special Use Permit Case Number SUP 0010-2015 to formally update the Jamestown Beach Event Parks Board-adopted Master Plan dated September 2020. The subject property is located at 2205 Jamestown Road, zoned PL Public Lands, classified as a community character conservation, open space, or recreation on the 2045 Comprehensive Plan, and located inside the primary service area. In formally amending this SUP and adopting a revised master plan, staff finds the proposed conditions will mitigate impacts to surrounding properties. Also, staff finds that this proposal is compatible with surrounding zoning and development and is generally consistent with the 2045 Comprehensive Plan and zoning ordinance. To date, there have been no citizen comments regarding this case. Taking all factors favorable into account, staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application to the Board of Supervisors, subject to the proposed conditions. Thank you for your time this evening, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have. And again, Mr. Carnifax is here, should you have any questions for him.
Anybody have a question for the staff or for Mr. Carnifax? Thank you. I have one speaker card, Mr. Henderson.
My lucky night, I'm the only one. All right, with regard to the proposed changes, I would just ask if there was consideration as to the impacts of these changes on the Jamestown National Park and Preservation Virginia properties across the street. Periodically, every 25, every 20 years, every 50, every 100 years, there are massive celebrations. We just had one in 2007 at Jamestown, and that area was used for overflow parking and for events. So I would just ask that we keep in mind that we're not the only user of the property, and that whatever we do should not negatively impact potential uses of that land in cooperation where we're bringing in major events for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on this item? Okay, hearing none, I will close the public hearing and open it up for discussion or a motion. Any discussion for commissioners? If not, we're going to have two motions that we need, one for consistency with the comp plan, and the second one, either approval or disapproval of the SUP. Do I have a motion for consistency?
So moved.
Motion for the consistency of the comp plan.
Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
And Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Now need a motion for approval or disapproval of the SUP 23005 Jamestown Event Park Beach.
I move that we support permit number 23-0006. I'm sorry, got the wrong one. I'm looking at the wrong one. You could do it, do the number.
2305005.
005.
We have a motion?
Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye. Okay, motion carried, and we're moving on now to SUP 23006, Upper County Park Master Plan Amendment. Mr. Loppacher, you're back with us again.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Mr. Alistair Perkinson, Parks Administrator for the Parks and Recreation Department, has submitted a request to amend Special Use Permit Case Number SUP 0029-1994 to formally update the Upper County Parks Board adopted master plan dated January 2023. The subject property is located at 180 Leisure Road, zoned PL Public Lands, classified as Community Character Conservation, Open Space, or Recreation on the 2045 Comprehensive Plan, and located outside of the primary service area. In formally amending this SUP and adopting a revised master plan, staff finds that the proposed conditions will mitigate impacts to surrounding properties. Also, staff finds that this proposal is compatible with surrounding zoning and development and is generally consistent with the 2045 Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Ordinance. To date, there have been no citizen comments regarding this case. Taking all factors into account, staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application to the Board of Supervisors, subject to the proposed conditions. Thank you for your time this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And again, Mr. Carnifax is here as well.
Any of the commissioners have any questions for staff or Mr. Carnifax? Okay, thank you. And I've opened the public hearing, and we have one speaker card. Mr. Henderson.
Absolutely. All righty. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. The surrounding property is owned by the Hazelwood family, and it was the subject of a rezoning several years ago that changed its designation from agricultural to economic opportunity district. Well, that property is now under contract, and it is proposed to be developed for general industry. Understand there's a big warehouse developer that is going to be coming there and building a major distribution or manufacturing facility. Not sure who the users are, but I would question whether or not a park use is going to be compatible with general industry and whether or not the county might be best served in looking at that land as an economic development opportunity and including it into the Hazelwood property and relocating the facility and doing something in a more appropriate location. We do not have that many interstate interchanges in James City County. This particular park sits within 1,000 feet of Interstate 64 and Route 60. Actually, I think it's Route 30 at that point. And so, as I look at the bigger picture, to have a park in the middle of now a major industrial park, which will have lots of truck traffic, presumably, is park use going to be the continuing highest and best use? And should we be continuing to invest in a facility adjacent to a major industrial complex located in an interstate interchange? Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this item? Hearing and seeing none, I will close the public comment period and open it for discussion or a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we find SUP 23-0006, 180 Leisure Road, compatible or consistent with the James City County 2045 Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Holloman. We have a motion.
Mr. Crop.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Ms. Knoll.
Aye.
And Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Motion carries.
I now need a motion to either approve or disapprove SUP 23006, Upper County Park.
Motion to approve 23-006 and associated conditions.
Mr. Holt, we have a motion.
Mr. Crop.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Ms. Knoll.
Aye.
And Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next item on our agenda is SUP 23007, Warhill Sports Complex Master Plan Amendment. Ms. Yates, you're back again.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. Mr. Alistair Perkinson, Parks Administrator for the Parks and Recreation Department, has submitted a request to amend Special Use Permit Case Number SUP-0014-2016 and Master Plan Case Number MP-0002-2016 for the Warhill Sports Complex. The subject properties are located at 4900 Stadium Trail, 5700 Warhill Trail, and 5720 Warhill Trail, zoned PL Public Lands, classified as Community Character Conservation, Open Space, or Recreation on the 2045 Comprehensive Plan. These parcels are located inside the primary service area. This application for a specially permitted use seeks to formally adopt the Warhill Sports Complex Master Plan dated September 2021, which was previously approved by the Board of Supervisors at its January 25th, 2022 meeting. Staff finds the proposed conditions will mitigate impacts to surrounding properties. Also, staff finds that this proposal is compatible with surrounding zoning and development and is generally consistent with the 2045 Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Ordinance. To date, the feedback we received from citizens included 1 phone call, 1 drop-in, and 2 emails seeking clarification of the proposed amenities included and proposed amenities eliminated from the 2021 Master Plan. Taking all factors favorable into account, staff recommends that Planning Commission recommend approval of this application to the Board of Supervisors subject to the proposed conditions. Thank you for your time this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. In addition, Mr. Carnifex is also here.
Anybody have any questions for staff or Mr. Carnifex?
Thank you.
I will open the public hearing. Do we have any speaker cards?
Mr. Henderson.
Mr. Henderson.
All right, good evening, Planning Commissioners. Chris Henderson, 101 Keystone. The biggest issue that I have with the Warhill Sports Complex is traffic mitigation. I live in Ford's Colony and travel up and down Long Hill Road frequently, and the users who are trying to exit the park have a very difficult time exiting the sports complex most times of the day on Long Hill Road. Something needs to be done there at the intersection to either provide signalization or widening to allow for better traffic flow in that area. I know it is a great frustration for patrons of the park, because when my son played baseball there, we could sit there trying to get back out onto Long Hill Road for 20 or 30 minutes just trying to exit the park. So hopefully this plan addresses that issue and provides alternative ingress and egress or improved ingress and egress along Long Hill Road and then also back out to Centerville. Thank you.
Are there anybody else who would like to speak on this item? If you'd like to come up and speak and make your comments, please come up. I will close the public comment and look for discussion or a motion.
I move to approve the resolution for master plan consistency for 23-0007.
Have a motion on the floor.
Mr. Croft.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Ms. Knoll.
Aye.
And Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, now we're moving on to, oh, I'm sorry.
One for the SUP, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. We need one for the SUP. Can I have a motion for the SUP for approval?
So moved with conditions.
Mr. Croft.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Ms. Knoll.
Aye.
And Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
I'd just like to make a comment to the commissioners that I hope that the Long Hill widening Phase 2 finally takes place, which does the widening and puts the signalization up there at some point. I just don't know if we have the money to be able to do it, but hopefully we will. So now moving on to Ordinance 23001, amendments to the zoning ordinance regarding vape and smoke shops. Ms. Yates again? Oh, Mr. Rivera's going to do it.
Community rec facilities.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that again. It's Ordinance 22004, amendments to the zoning ordinance regarding community recreation facilities in the residential district. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. At its meeting on April 12, 2022, the Board of Supervisors adopted an initiated resolution to consider amendments to James City County zoning ordinance regarding community recreation facilities. Currently, the county's ordinance defines recreational facilities and further classifies them as being either commercial or community. Staff understands that at least one neighborhood's community recreation facility is being used by a group and team sports not affiliated with the neighborhood such additional group and team sport use does bring with potential for impacts such as increased vehicular traffic, noise, lighting, and duration of use not commonly found with typical neighborhood facilities. The purpose of this ordinance amendment would be to classify community recreation facilities with recurring use by outside entities as a specially permitted use, allowing public input, analysis, and mitigation of impacts as determined. At its meeting on December 8th of 2022, the Policy Committee met to discuss the proposed amendment and requested staff to investigate and address a list of questions by the committee. A summary of the questions included the following: how widespread is this problem? How many complaints has staff received, and how are recreation associations handling this issue? For a complete list of questions with staff analysis, please refer to the memorandum included in your package. The memorandum also provides a summary of the issues raised by the complainant, such as parking outside facility parking areas, on streets, increased traffic, and noise. At its meeting on February 9th of 2023, the Policy Committee reviewed and discussed the information provided by staff and found that overall, the issue was a very infrequent problem and would require substantial staff oversight, and that there are perhaps easier ways to handle issues involving community recreation facilities. The Policy Committee unanimously recommended by a vote of 4-0 that the Planning Commission not recommend adoption of this ordinance amendment unless the problem increases in frequency. The staff has attached a draft ordinance amendment for the Commission's consideration, and staff is happy to answer any questions you may have at this time. Thank you very much for your time.
Are there any questions for staff? If not, I will open the public hearing. Do we have any speaker cards? Is there anybody that would like to speak on this item? Hearing and seeing none, I will close the public hearing and open it up for discussion or a motion.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Policy Committee, we were reluctant to create another ordinance, another county ordinance, to address an issue like this, which is probably, not probably, I'm sure it is a serious annoyance to the people who live close by, but there are other ways to handle it. There is a zoning ordinance prohibiting noise next to a neighborhood outside of the hours of outside of 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. There is a noise ordinance. There's a parking ordinance if parking backs up onto the residential streets. And these can all be addressed without a new ordinance. As Mr. Ribeiro said, I think there would be a real enforcement difficulty with a new ordinance like this. And so we just felt like we'd like to recommend that we don't go forward on this.
Any other discussion or comments?
I think I would offer, just for everybody's edification too, that, there was only one complaint received. And so I think this is a broad brush attempt to remedy a smaller local problem that has significant impacts across the entire county. Because, certainly this is the issue is a recreation facility that is not within a homeowners association, but through our subdivision ordinance, we require homeowners associations, we require recreation facilities, and if we start putting in SUPs, I don't know where we draw the line when we talk about uses of a facility that a normal homeowner association would employ. And certainly there's a process in a homeowners association for members to adopt rules, to file complaints if there's a violation of those rules. And I just think this is personally a slight overreach into the operation of a community facility or a homeowners association that just is not warranted. So
Haldeman.
I don't intend to support it.
I meant to mention earlier too, an amendment to this ordinance wouldn't help this particular problem anyway because it would be grandfathered. So, and if this is the only problem, it wouldn't help it.
Any other discussion or a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend that the Board of Supervisors not approve the draft ordinance included in our packet.
Again, thank you. Since this is a motion to not recommend approval, an aye vote would be to support not recommending approval. A no vote would be the opposite of that. Mr. Crop?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Now we're on to ordinance 23001, amendments to the zoning ordinance regarding vape shops. You have the
Thank you,
floor.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. I have to say that my report might be just a repetitive of Mr. Haldeman's great report earlier today, so thank you for that. On January 24th, 2023, the Board of Supervisors adopted an initiating resolution to consider possible amendments to the James City County zoning ordinance to require vape and smoke shops to obtain a special use permit. Staff has received numerous calls from citizens regarding vape and smoke shops in the county. Specifically, citizens have voiced concerns over the locations of these shops in close proximity to schools and the Toano Commercial Historical District. Additionally, staff has received complaints of non-compliant lights on the exterior of windows or buildings and of individuals smoking outside the retail store near other places of business. Staff is aware of currently 9 existing retail shops in the county. Staff understands that the purpose of the initiating resolution and this ordinance amendment is to define and classify vape and smoke shops as a standalone, specially permitted use and ensure that all associated and accessory uses are addressed. Uses listed in each zoning district are either permitted by right or permitted by a special use permit. The current ordinance generally permits vape and smoke shops under the retail service store use category, which includes tobacco and pipe stores. Retail sales of tobacco and pipes are permitted by right in the R4 residential planned community, LB limited business, B1 general business, M1 limited business/industrial, PUD planned unit development, MU mixed use, and EO economic opportunity districts. Should the ordinance be amended to specially permit vape and smoke shops, the existing stores will become non-conforming. Section 24-629 of the zoning ordinance states that a non-conforming use may continue as it existed when it became non-conforming, provided if any non-conforming use is discontinued for a period of 2 years, it shall lose that non-conforming status. The City of Williamsburg amended its zoning ordinance in January of 2023 to require vape and smoke shops obtain a special use permit in various commercial districts. Staff surveyed other localities and found that most permit vape and smoke shops as a generally permitted use. Staff presented materials at the March 9th, 2023 meeting of the Policy Committee and recommended the following changes to the ordinance to address this directive. 1, add new definitions for vape/smoke shop and vape/smoke lounges within Section 24-2 definitions. Amend the existing retail store and shop definition to exclude vape/smoke shops and vape/smoke lounges within 24-2 definition. Remove tobacco and pipe from retail and service store use in categories in the zoning use categories R4, LB, B1, M1, PUD, MU, and EO districts. And then add vape/smoke shop and vape/smoke lounge as a specially permitted use in the R4, LB, B1, M1, PUD, MU, and EO districts. The Policy Committee voted to recommend approval of the proposed changes to the Planning Commission with a few minor additions. Furthermore, the Policy Committee also discussed that they would favor including a compliance review condition to any future special use permit requests similar to the short-term rentals to address any non-compliance activity. Staff recommends the Planning Commission approval of the attached ordinance to the Board of Supervisors. I thank you for the time in the matter, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for staff? Ms. Parrish, do we have the language that we would use to put the condition in there to be able to forward it to the to the board?
Staff, excuse me, I'm sorry, of the ordinance or of the condition of the special use permit?
Conditions of the special use permit.
Staff did not draft that language because that would be done at the time of the request. So it wouldn't go into the ordinance, it would just be addressed at the time of the special use permit.
But it's presented to the board.
Yes.
Do we have any idea what that language is going to say?
This would be at the time of the special use permit request itself, so it would not go into the zoning ordinance.
I got you.
Yep.
I got it. Okay. Any other questions for staff? Thank you.
Sure.
So I will open up the public hearing. Is there anybody who would like to speak on this item? Hearing and none, I will close the public hearing and open up for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move approval of ORD 23-0001.
Have a motion?
Mr. Croft.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Ms. Knoll.
Aye.
Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, on to the last item on the agenda. Ordinance 22003, amendment for calculation of the residential development density. Mr. Leininger.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. At the March 8th, 2022 Board of Supervisors meeting, a board member made a request to bring forward an initiating resolution to consider amending the zoning ordinance regarding how residential density is calculated with a direction to explore using a net acreage calculation. The board adopted the initiating resolution at its April 12th, 2022 meeting. At its January 24th, 2023 meeting, the board provided further guidance that the intent of the initiating resolution is to avoid having pockets of high-density residential development and to reduce impacts to the environment. The policy committee considered this amendment at its January 12th and February 23rd meetings. Currently, the Economic Opportunity District uses a net acreage approach, while the R1 limited residential, R2 general residential, R3 residential redevelopment, R4 residential planned community, R5 multifamily residential, PUD planned unit development, and MU mixed use districts, along with the residential cluster development overlay district, utilize a stepped approach to calculate density. The stepped approach allows properties with lower percentages of non-developable areas to calculate density using the total area of the parcel, while properties with higher percentages of non-developable areas calculate density with the developable area plus a certain percentage of the total parcel area. The zoning ordinance currently defines developable areas as being the total area of the parcel minus the non-developable areas, which are areas in the resource protection area, areas within floodplains designated as having a 1% annual chance storm event, and areas with steep slopes. The A1 general agricultural, R6 low-density residential, and R8 rural residential districts do not currently have density requirements and instead have minimum lot sizes that apply. Policy guidance from the comprehensive plan includes the recommended density ranges for the land use designations, recognizing that residential growth should be directed to occur inside the PSA where it results in more efficiency for public services, goals for providing opportunities for affordable housing, and having a consistent character and compatibility between adjacent developments. The net density approach could potentially reduce the residential capacity in the PSA, reducing the efficiency of public services, increasing growth pressure on areas outside the PSA, and potentially reducing opportunities for affordable housing. While the net density approach could, however, result in adjacent developments having a consistent intensity development if they're within the same zoning district. To meet the direction of the initiating resolution, staff has prepared draft ordinance language which would implement a net acreage approach in all of the zoning districts referenced. The draft ordinance language adds a definition for net density to section 24-2 to state that net density is calculated by dividing the number of dwelling units by the developable area of the parcel. The draft language includes revisions to each zoning district to reference that new definition of net density as necessary and to remove sections and language pertaining to those current density calculation methods. The A1 and R8 districts have historically controlled development intensity with the minimum lot sizes established in the districts. The draft language includes adding new sections which apply net density for major subdivisions, as well as updating the A1 cluster configuration subdivision section to specify net density. The rural lands designation in the comprehensive plan recommends a density of 1 unit per 20 acres, but does not specify that it should be based on net acreage. Previous ordinance revisions made the minimum lot sizes in these districts consistent with the rural lands designation, and implementing a density section could result in lot sizes that are considerably larger than 20 acres. Staff finds that the minimum lot size provisions currently in place adequately ensures that the character of residential development in the A1 and R8 districts is compatible with the rural lands designation and does not recommend revising these districts to implement the net density calculation. The R6 district also does not currently have a density requirement and instead requires lots to be a minimum of 1 acre in size. The draft language includes adding a new section to the district which applies a net density calculation for major subdivisions. All land zoned R6 is part of existing platted subdivisions which are primarily built out, and the district is not envisioned for future development and instead remains in place to govern the existing subdivisions. Staff finds that no substantial benefit would be received from implementing net density in this district and does not recommend revising the district. The R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, and PUD districts, along with the Residential Cluster Development Overlay District, currently utilize the stepped approach for calculating density. To implement net density in these districts, the draft ordinance includes deleting language pertaining to the stepped approach and referencing net density within the use list and density sections where necessary in each of these districts. The low density residential and moderate density residential comprehensive plan designations have recommended densities which are based on gross acreage, meaning that a net acreage approach would be less consistent with the comprehensive plan. While, however, a net density approach could result in those adjacent developments having a more compatible intensity of development. Staff finds that the current stepped approach serves as a compromise between these considerations. The MU district currently utilizes the stepped approach. The draft ordinance includes deleting the language pertaining to the stepped approach and referencing the net density definition. The EO district currently utilizes a net density. However, updating the district to reference the proposed net density definition would make it more consistent with the other districts should they be revised to net density. Mixed use and economic opportunity, Moortown Road, Hill Pleasant Farm area comprehensive plan designations have recommended densities based on net acreage. Staff finds that using the net acreage calculation in the MU and EO districts would be most consistent with the comprehensive plan and recommends revising these districts. At its February 23rd meeting, the Policy Committee recommended approval of the draft language for the R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, PUD, MU, and EO districts, along with the Residential Cluster Development Overlay District. The Policy Committee did not recommend approval of the draft language for the A1, R8, and R6 districts. Should the Planning Commission recommend utilizing the net density approach for one or more of the districts discussed, draft ordinance language has been provided for your consideration. Prior to tonight's meeting, staff has received written comments from citizens which were forwarded to the Planning Commission in advance of the meeting. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Have any questions for staff? Mr. Graff.
Good evening, Mr. Leininger. I have two questions. One is, I know the definition and the example is in your packet, but for those people who are watching tonight, could you give a very brief summary of the STEP approach? You mentioned that it's a hybrid between net density and gross density, but if you could just very briefly talk a little bit about it, because it's been referenced several times tonight.
Sure. So the stepped approach, which is in a number of our districts, includes a table which says that if a parcel is between or has between 0 and 20% non-developable areas, they would be able to use the total parcel area when calculating their density. However, once you get up to a higher percentage of non-developable areas, whether that be 21% to 40%, 41% to 70%, and 71% to 100%, they calculate their density by taking the area that is developable and adding a smaller percentage of the total parcel area to that developable area as the area that they can use to calculate density.
So the larger the amount of undevelopable land in a parcel, it gives the developer a small bonus or a small additional factor that they could use for density. Is that a summary?
Compared to the net density approach.
Compared to the net density, okay. And so it's right now, all the residential districts use the STEP approach, is that right?
Right, most of them.
Okay. All right, for their density. Thank you, that's helpful. And then the other question that I have, and this was actually brought up in a telephone conversation I had with a citizen yesterday, questioning whether going with the net density approach could have unintended consequences in the sense that it could discourage conservation applications for properties. And as you know, a conservation easement on a property would take for the financial benefits of the landowner, whether in the form of cash or tax credits, they would take the difference between the current value of the land and the highest and best use of that land. Say you could put 50 houses on a parcel. So that would be, if you had a high percentage of houses that could go on a parcel, then the potential tax benefit to the landowner would be conceivably greater. If we went to the net approach, that reduces the number of residential units that could go on a property. Does that also lessen the conservation value of the property and could perhaps be a discouraging factor for people looking at conservation easements?
Mr. Kraft, I'm gonna take that one on because that's certainly a complicated question. There are a lot of factors that go into computing that calculation. That is not a calculation that county staff does. That's not a calculation, that valuation, if you will, is not something that county staff is really even involved with. That typically starts with appraisers and then it works its way through various other professions as well. The reason why that's a hard question to answer, and probably the best answer, is it depends. I know generally appraisers will take into account whether or not that development is allowed by right or whether or not development is granted via legislative approvals. And so if ultimately some of that highest and best use could say only be granted via a legislative approval, they don't presume those approvals will be granted. They don't automatically factor those in. They really sort of look at what could be done by right. And they just kind of start from there. But, you know, given that there are a number of intricacies with those calculations, I'm not sure staff would, from the planning side of the house, we would feel comfortable answering that definitively. It's hard to say.
Okay. All right, that's fair. So potentially less density might affect a conservation value, but it's unknown until the mechanism is actually put into place.
Correct. And whoever is granting that credit, whoever's the beneficiary of that easement, you know, it depends on the value of that easement. You know, is about the quality of the open space, what it is, what it consists of, Does it have undevelopable? Does it not have undevelopable? And that's just going to be, based on the value that whoever would be the recipient of that would value that price point to be.
Okay.
Again, which would really be beyond the scope of what county staff could do.
Thanks, Mr. Holt.
But
Sure.
as a follow-on, certainly, if we were employing a purchase of development rights, I mean, it would just stand to reason that if a parcel was less developable, then there's no, if a parcel was developable to 50 lots and it's now reduced to 30 lots, then that value of those 20 lots is gone. I mean, I think that would be.
I mean, it factors in, but again, with some of the county's, open space programs and some of those, it's again, kind of goes into the value of the easement and what is being protected. While certainly some of that factors in development potential, again, what's being preserved? Is it land that's significant to environmental protection? Is it land that's significant to cultural or some other natural asset protection? And there's lots of sort of reasons for sort of pursuing those easements, and would just really depend based on that particular program. Out of all of sort of the factors considered and weighted factors considered, it would just sort of depend on how many units that part of it went into the larger figuring and coming up with the valuation of the easement. It's not the sole component, I guess is also what I'm trying to convey a little bit.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you very much. At this point, I will open up the public hearing, and the first speaker card I have is Kimberly Maggie. Couldn't tell it was an E or an L.
Oh, I probably tonight. Hi, good evening. My name is Kimberly McGee. My address is 248 William Barksdale. I've been a resident here for 7 years, and I put together some words that I'd like to share with you tonight. I moved to Williamsburg because it's a special place. There's history here, there's culture, there's academia, it's natural beauty, it's wildlife, it's amazing ecosystem. Most of all, we have a quality of life here that I haven't experienced anywhere else, and I have great neighbors. I became interested in this issue of density after reading a proposal to build the 90 townhomes on Old County Road. I thought surely it was a mistake. Surely County Road's protected. 93 townhomes on a small space. 2 cars per house. How many Amazon delivery trucks are going to be zipping through our neighborhood? When I asked how people felt, nobody likes the idea, but they shrugged their shoulders. They felt powerless. They believe developers can do whatever they want because the county wants tax revenues. When I received your letter announcing this hearing, I was thrilled. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this issue. I'd like to make a brief comment on tax revenues, quality of life, and the responsibility of protecting Williamsburg's ethos. Tax revenue. There's a thing called rooftop economics. It teaches us that if you build more rooftops, businesses will come, and the taxes paid by these businesses will pay for the new infrastructure. For example, roads, water, sewer, power, new schools, larger police forces. I know you know all this. But that was pre-Amazon. That was pre-COVID. Demand for brick and mortar has dropped. Marquee centers struggling, for example. We cannot expect that more rooftops are going to bring in the business tax revenue that we expect. We will be the ones paying for increase in density. Quality of life. I left a densely populated Northern Virginia for Williamsburg, and we should consider some of the lessons learned. Don't build dense communities without public transportation. Traffic becomes a nightmare. Energy is a limited resource. Prices soar. If you're going to go for a dense community, require energy efficiency, solar, geothermal, anything. Trash was a problem. Consider compost and recycle programs, schools. Redistricting created separated friends and families and neighborhoods. Density has an impact on quality of life. And finally, responsibility. As residents, we are stewards. We are responsible for protecting our community. I'm not against growth. I accept growth. But I ask we be wise. Let's not build beyond what we can support. Let's ensure our beautiful ecosystem full of wildlife thrives. I ask the committee, will the revenue generated from densely populated communities justify the negative impact to safety, security, and the welfare of its residents? Thank you.
Thank you. My next speaker I have is Mr. and Mrs. Frederick Crawford.
Except that, hello first.
Please state your name and your address.
Juanita Crawford. We just recently moved back to this area. We left this area when I was a teenager, and I've seen all the changes. But I don't quite understand what you are saying about the density in the community, and how does it apply to the person who's just a landowner, just a property owner? How does it apply to how many houses you can put on your land as a homeowner? I noticed that the development next to our property, there are a lot of people staying there. And the development across the street. When we were here my family over 100 years ago, none of that was here. So when I don't really understand the amendment of the calculation of the residential development. What do you mean by that? I know you all know, but I don't know.
Ma'am, this is a chance for you to speak, not for us to have a dialogue.
Yeah, but that's what I'm asking. What do you mean? What are you trying to say? You want the developers not to do too much development, or is it the people who own the land not do any development?
Once again, ma'am, this is not a dialogue between you and us. This is for us to hear what you have to say.
I can't say what I want to say unless I know what I'm saying it about. My thing is, what do you mean by number 7?
Mr. Chairman, what we could do is, following the public hearing and following the presentation, we'll be happy to get your contact information. We'll give you a call. We'll spend all the time we can with you, and we'll be happy to walk you through that at the staff level.
So everybody in this room, they understand that except me.
I have no idea, ma'am.
I mean, because no one else is saying anything. And I don't seem dumb, but I don't understand what you are planning to do with your calculations.
Once the public hearing closes, we'll get your contact information. We'll be happy to spend as much time with you as you need.
Okay.
And walk you through it all.
Next speaker card I have is Mr. Henderson.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Henderson, 101 Keystone. As was the case with number 5, ORD 22-004, which was a solution in search of a problem, this is another solution in search of a problem, okay? The zoning ordinances that we have work effectively. They discount development potential based upon physical characteristics of the land and do not incentivize over-development of parcels. And what this ordinance proposes to do is to devalue the remaining land that we have in James City County that is suitable for development. And as a taxpayer, I just find that objectionable. Has anybody bothered to figure out what is the economic impact of what you're proposing to do? I would dare say that it's going to be more than $1 million or $2 per year in negative economic impact. And that economic impact gets shouldered by we, the remaining taxpayers, who have to pay for the devaluation in land that you're casting upon our fellow citizens. It was bad enough, and if I had been well enough, I would have come here and I'd have packed this place when the board downzoned A1 land to 1 unit per 20 acres. I mean, that is just a complete travesty. And now you're going to layer on top of it a further reduction in development potential. And for what, and for what purpose? If the comprehensive plan says that affordable housing is an important initiative, criteria, value for James City County, this amendment stands in direct opposition to an objective, a major objective of the comprehensive plan, and should not be approved. So when you look at this, it doesn't differentiate between affordable housing or 4,000, 5,000 square foot houses. It affects unit density based upon developable acreage. And I would also tell you that anything that impacts development and the density of development in your commercial areas is completely counterproductive. We want to maximize development potential in our commercial areas so that we can generate the maximum amount of economic impact. Okay, we don't have vast swaths of acreage available. Our land masses are largely developed. You will not see another Kings Mill, you won't see another Governor's Land, Colonial Heritage, Ford's Colony. We're out of land. So now we're talking about infill development and how do we properly administer that and facilitate the development for those few remaining landowners who have held on to their land and try to be good stewards. And Mr. Kropp, to answer your question specifically about whether or not there will be a devaluation of land and the conservation easements, yes, it will be. I've been in the real estate business for 40 years. I understand land valuation, and I can tell you emphatically that the value of the conservation easements will go down because there's less income to be derived from the developable property. So there will be an economic impact, which is a disincentive to do what we want property owners to do, which is to put their land in conservation easements. So again, you've got this tension between one objective of the comprehensive plan and this proposed ordinance change, which further dips in and reduces the value of land and its development potential. So in answer to the lady's question here about what this does, is if you own property, the county doesn't want you to build as much on that property as you currently can. That's what it's about. Okay? So, I mean, when you boil it all down, that's what it comes down to. So I've said enough, and I thank you for your attention.
Next speaker card I have is Mr. Jay Everson.
Jay Everson, 6923 Chancery Lane. One observation, we got that letter about this thing, and I got to tell you, everybody I talked to were like, what is this? It was like written and nobody understood it. In fact, if I had known that this was coming up, I'm not sure I would have understood what it was talking about either. I don't know why it was sent out. I've been here 40 years this week, and this place is a lot better than it was when I got here. And Mr. Henderson has taken away my thunder, because I was also going to say this ordinance here is a solution in seek of a problem. You have on page 2, 2012, it talks about stepped approach. This is reasonable. I mean, you got what's being proposed here is taking a sledgehammer, to a attack. It's absurd. And on page 3 of your staff report, as Mr. Henderson mentioned, workforce housing, forget it. It's going to drive the cost up because of the lack of developable land. It goes on to talk about, we want infill development inside the PSA. That's what we've been wanting. Everybody's concerned about the rural lands. You want to have it inside the PSA, and now we're going to make it more harder to do that? And then the last thing here, it talks about you're going to have inconsistent developments in the same area because these are going to have different rules than the places that came before. To be quite honest with you, I don't understand what the problem is. You know, you can't develop on certain land. You approved a natural and cultural resource study, which talks about how to save land, put the land that, is not really developable and put it aside. You have corridors, and you can do all that under existing ordinance. So I hope that you guys will just say no to this whole thing. Thank you.
We don't have any more speaker cards. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this subject? Please.
Good evening. How you guys doing? My name's Hunter Taylor. I live at 999 Jolly Pond Road. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I received a letter this past Friday. So I had 4 days to understand what was being proposed, try to formulate some type of comprehension. Not enough time when you have 3 kids and are working a demanding job. And so I'm not even sure why this ordinance is being presented tonight at this meeting. It clearly seems it's being forced through. But I do come here from 2 perspectives. One, being a large property owner, a conservationist, an outdoor enthusiast, someone that cares deeply about the environment, but also as a builder. I am a home builder by trade, a developer, and I've been in the business for 20 years. And home ownership and housing affordability we have a crisis going on in the United States right now. And as I started to look into this over the last 72 hours, not enough time to come well-informed or really be able to articulate any points, I did want to share some thoughts because something of this magnitude absolutely needs more consideration. The fact that Mr. Holt can't even answer how it could affect the values of land is a very big problem. Every one of you should understand that very clearly. But one thing is affordability. If we can't find ways to be creative, to put lots on the ground, we are going to take this country further over a cliff. Right now, most Americans in this country don't have enough savings. They don't have enough savings for retirement. They don't have enough savings for a rainy day. But they're very fortunate that they have a nest egg of equity in their home. Without that nest of equity, it would be a scary situation. The retirees wouldn't have money to spend. They wouldn't be feeding the economy. And you can already see the early signs of where we're headed. Since 1970, if you look at home building as a whole, we have gone from 5% of publicly traded home builders. Last year, there was over 51% of the home builders in the United States were publicly traded companies. The world is going to corporate America. And now, corporate America and corporate home builders are going to build the rent because you cannot build a home with the cost of land, the cost to develop, and then make the economic return on a point-of-sale transaction. You have to take your pro forma and monetize it over time, a rental. And so we're going to a point of two social class system. We're going to have the landlords and we're going to have the renters. And a large majority of this country is going to be renters in 20 years. Our children, my children, are not going to be able to afford a home with where we're headed. And so I tried to do some research. I spoke to Mr. Rissinger. I had a great conversation with Mr. Kraft yesterday. But there's no data. The county has done zero due diligence. There's zero. If I came in presenting a case to you guys, I would need a fiscal impact. It would be rich with data and how this would impact. This thing is being pushed through. We're not having good debate. And then my other question is, Mr. Eisenhower is the supervisor that initiated this resolution back in March 22nd. He said he put this forward because there was a report he saw that 35% of the land in the county is undevelopable. I don't understand what that has to do with this ordinance. What is the connection? So, Ms. Crawford, you have a very good question. I don't really understand what we're trying to achieve. Are we trying to conserve land? Are we trying to limit growth? What is the underlying objective? Are we not sophisticated enough to come up to identify what the solution is and then think strategically? We can conserve land. We can limit growth. We can protect the environment. We can achieve homeowner affordability. We could do those things, but we can't take siloed approaches. We need to think. And so this ordinance was proposed March 22nd of last year. Wasn't the comp plan updated in December or October, something like that? Why are we just hearing about this now? Why did we go through a whole comp plan update? And this letter comes out Friday of last week, and I'm sitting here tonight talking to you, asking these questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this item? Please.
Vivian Herbert, 141 Wareham's Point in Kingsmill. This has been revelatory to me because I really thought that this density was spurred by what Escalante wants to do in Kingsmill. But I'm seeing that this is such a broader effect. And I want to thank you for letting me speak at the beginning. He told me that he didn't think it was pertinent. But I do want to submit this with my other.
Please. Thank you very much.
Because this should give you the overall. We're talking about an incredible amount of land that Escalante wants to develop in Kingsmill. And all of us are scared by it. And we're hoping that it's done properly. We know there's going to be growth, but the density, especially when you give us a map that doesn't tell us what you're going to do, raises even more questions about what they can do without being transparent. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this issue? Sir.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Stephen Zabinski. I live at 5133 Ginger Court, and I would like to, I guess, reiterate the point that the lady over here made. I mean, I received that letter, and I have a college degree, and I have to admit that I understand that it was written in English. But I had a lot of trouble understanding what it was trying to say and what the purpose of this resolution is. And hearing my fellow citizens speaking about it tonight, I've got a much better understanding. And to hear a subject matter expert on real estate and land values say unequivocally, no, this is going to drastically impact land values, when the board members and even staff weren't able to answer that conclusively. I think voting yes at this point is incredibly premature. If you can't vote this down, at least table the motion so we can have more time for public comments, public input, and a greater understanding of the economic impact of what this proposed change is going to bring forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this issue? Sir.
My name is Gary Moore, 158 Forsyth Road. And I just want to say the same as Ms. Crawford and the rest of them. We don't understand what this is about. I mean, I understand what you're trying to do, but we don't know how it's going to affect us. And I too got the letter, Googling, trying to figure out what's going on. So I think everyone in these zones, I noticed you list a whole bunch of different zones. I think everyone in these zones probably need to get some more information before you guys approve this. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Or anybody else that would like to speak? Hearing and seeing none, I will close the public hearing and open it up for discussion amongst the commissioners. Mr. Kraft.
Mr. Chairman, during the 2+ years I worked on the comprehensive plan, two of the important elements to me in that document were, number one, restricting residential growth in the rural lands to retain the open vistas, but number two was to drive residential growth into the public service area, or the PSA, where we already have utilities and infrastructure in place, where we have a need for infill development, where we have potentially abandoned commercial buildings or shopping centers that could be creatively converted to workforce and affordable housing. And the point I'm getting at was one of the driving factors was to provide workforce and affordable housing by providing incentives inside the public service area. When we went through looking at the staff report, for example, they've already, the report says we don't need to do any changes in A1 and R6 and R8, because by changing the by right development to 1 house per 20 acres, we've effectively severely limited residential growth pressures in the rural lands. However, by going to a net density calculation in all of the residential districts right now, I think is going to have an unintended consequence, and it's alluded to or stated in the staff report that in fact what that is going to do is possibly force more demand back into the rural lands again. And the comprehensive plan was very specific about trying to allow for growth inside the public service area. And it was a real revelation when you look at the statistics that say the average American today, if they're faced with a $500 unexpected bill in a month, they don't know how they can pay that. And one of the few remaining methods of building wealth in this country is home equity. And so I feel that what this county needs, one of the things this county needs is a reinstatement of the housing policy document that used to be in place that encourages builders to include, if they included affordable housing or workforce housing, for example, in their proposals, they could get some extra density credits and so on. Right now, we don't have a housing opportunities policy in place, and that's one of the things that I think reinforces some of the comments that were made about, is this an ordinance change looking for a problem, because we haven't put all the tools in place yet, in my opinion, including a housing opportunities policy to address some of these critical issues. And so I just feel that right now the current approach of using the stepped approach, and that's why I asked the question I did earlier tonight, for the residential districts is a good compromise between using gross density and net density, and that driving all of our density calculations to net is going to do a disservice to especially not only some of the landowners, but also people in need of workforce and affordable housing. And so I won't be supporting this ordinance amendment this evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else would like to speak? Mr. Haldeman?
Yes, please. I do plan to support this amendment for several reasons. And these are all listed in the staff report. And by the way, just to be clear with everybody, the purpose of this is to reduce the credit that a property owner will get for development rights for non-developable property. For example, if you own 100 acres and it's zoned for quarter acres or something like quarter acre lots, and so you could build 400 homes on it, but 20 acres are in wetlands or steep slopes, which can't be built upon, gross density would still give you 400 homes. Net density would only give you credit for 80 acres because 20 acres is not affordable, or is not developable, excuse me. So you would only be able to build 320 homes on your property. And the stepped approach that has already been referred to is somewhere in between. It's a compromise between 320 and 400 homes. I favor, and presently in most of the residential development, most of the residential zones, we use the stepped approach, the alternative approach. That was changed in 2012. A lot of these districts, as I understand it, I wasn't here at the time, were gross density, and they were lowered to the stepped approach, not all the way to net density, and that this next step will be to go all the way to net density, which I favor. The points that against it have already been made, one of which is it will make remaining property more expensive, which will drive up the cost of housing, reduce affordability. I believe that could be taken care of or could be mitigated by reinstating the housing opportunities policy that Mr. Croft just alluded to, and instituting density bonus points. We already have density bonus points in our comprehensive plan and in our zoning ordinance to give credit for affordability. And so if you want to build homes that are affordable to people who earning between 30 and 60%, let's say, of area median income, you could get higher density. So that's one way to address affordability, which is unquestionably a major problem, and not only in James City County, but across the country. That's already been stated. The things that are driving me towards supporting this is, number one, community character. And we had a survey done in preparation for the last comprehensive plan, and it showed overwhelming numbers of James City County want us to do more to protect community character. Efforts to protect and improve the natural environment, including water quality and air quality and environmental sensitive areas. 95% of James City County residents classified that as very or somewhat important. And efforts to protect and preserve the county's rural character, 85% felt that was somewhat or very important. 93% of respondents to this survey felt that the level of residential development in the county is already too high or about right. That leaves 6.4% of people who want more housing in James City County. So community character is obviously very, very important to county residents, and this would do more to protect that. It would also lower the demand on public facilities. Residential development is a fiscal loser. It always has been. One of the residents here tonight pointed out that you try to compensate for that with commercial development. And by the way, this proposal is only for residential districts. It's not for commercial districts, which would be left unaffected by this. So, but residential development brings more demand for schools, more traffic, more demand for water, more demand for a lot of different public facilities which cost more than the tax revenue from the average residential home. The traffic congestion has been growing. We have significant intersections in James City County that are already impacted and are projected to get much worse based on the traffic studies we've done. More impervious surface ruins our watersheds. We have a number of our watersheds that are already impacted and headed for non-life supporting status. That was presented graphically in a recent Board of Supervisors business meeting. We spend the capital improvement program, the current one that was just adopted by the Board of Supervisors, has a $12.5 million expense over the next 5 years for addressing stormwater problems and impacted streams, trying to restore streams that are either heavily eroded or become polluted. So reducing or eliminating the credit that a property owner gets for non-developable land makes a lot of sense to me. It will reduce population growth, which is an essential in James City County, in my opinion. And at the same time, will be fiscally beneficial, also in my opinion. So I'll be voting in favor of it.
Any other comments, discussion?
Yeah, I actually have a few. I appreciate Mr. Henderson's comments tonight because he probably spoke it more eloquently than I do. I remain opposed to this. As most of my colleagues know, I did not vote in favor of this recent comp plan, primarily because of the 1 to 20 acreage in the rural lands. And while I recognize the input that we got through the comp plan, and I recognize that, you know, it's important to preserve our environmentally sensitive areas, you know, I will also note that in the comp plan, 84.4% of the respondents ranked that it was important for the county to do more to provide affordable housing opportunities that are affordable to our workforce. You know, for quality of life, you know, many of the requested improvements were to the stability of community services, including bicycle and pedestrian pathways and trails, internet service, library improvements, and public water. Public water we find within the PSA. Some of the key policy guidance that's in our comp plan and was part of the scenario building: provide a more compact development pattern that can better support multimodal transportation and provide more transportation options to county citizens. Foster development of more housing choices, increasing housing affordability for lower income members of the county's workforce, seniors, and persons suffering from homelessness, and increase accessibility, educational, and job training services for lower income members of the county's workforce, youth, and preschool age students. Foster the development of complete communities by locating new housing proximate to transit services, shopping, employment areas, recreational areas, schools, community facilities. Provide more housing options that increase the ability for workers to live locally and for households entering new lifestyle periods, such as first-time home buyers and empty nesters, to have options that allow them to continue to live in the county. Again, create complete communities with walkable environments and a mix of residential and commercial uses that 21st century businesses and employees desire. Include new retail and office growth as part of mixed-use complete communities rather than as standalone retail centers. Reduce commuting times by locating homes, businesses, and supportive uses in closer proximity within the PSA. Encourage localized job development to create higher paying jobs in James City County, create better jobs to housing balance, and reduce the need for cross-county commuting to other job locations or in commuting to jobs for workers that cannot afford to live in here. So I think there's plenty in our comp plan that says reducing density, especially in our residential areas inside the PSA, isn't supported by those goals. You know, we as a county have tools. If we're serious about preventing rural development, we shouldn't be allowing withdrawals from the AFD prior to the expiration of those applications. And to Mr. Haldeman's comment, I'll remind everybody that it was shared at the October 11, 2022 Board of Supervisors meeting that prior to Anheuser-Busch's arrival to James City County, the property tax rates were $1.40 per hundred, immediately reduced to 70 cents. So at 83 cents per hundred, I think it's really hard to say that development that's done smartly is necessarily detrimental. So and absent a housing opportunity policy, which our comp plan references, and absent a clustering ordinance that allows for development and no other incentives, there's no way reducing the developable acreage will create opportunities for affordable housing in this neighborhood or in this community. So I won't support it as it stands, and that's my bit. Thanks.
Barbara? Well, thank you all for coming out. I know this is a confusing issue. It took me a while to try to understand what this was about and what the implications were. And so I'm going to start with 2 points of reference. And the first one was the comp plan that we just approved here that talked about what this county would look like in 2045. And as we looked at what the county would look like, the issue of growth came up, and we currently have a population right now somewhere around 79,000. The projection for the county in 2045 was 120,000 folks. And it was based on the land that we've already zoned. Okay? So that's a lot of people with infrastructure that didn't pay. So when we did the comp plan, we were very careful to try to do a couple things. One, limit the growth in the rural lands, which we did. And the second one is to place growth inside of the PSA, which is where you want it, where you have all the services. Now, when you look at the upper county, that's where all the growth is going to take place in terms of cars, people, jobs, and everything else like that. And we clearly don't have the infrastructure for that. We clearly don't have that. So when you look at the comp plan map, as an example, up around the Tohanna area, one of the things that we were grappling with is what should the density be like in the upper county? And there was some feelings that we needed to put mixed use, which is high density in the upper county. There were some of us that said no. And so we said limited residential development, which means 1 acre per house. Now, there's nothing to stop a landowner from coming in and asking for a rezoning of that application. So if you take a look at a piece of land that's up there that's somewhere around gross 222 acres, that means that you could put, at low density residential, you could put maybe 222 houses. If they came in there for a mixed use on that land, and they got credit for the 63 acres that are in the resource protection area, have steep slopes, which you can't build on to begin with, right? You're not allowed to build on. He or she will be able to put 549 lots on that parcel. Now, that's a far reach from what we thought we wanted to do to handle the growth of almost 40,000 other people. And if you, in fact, and the person has the right to come in there, but in fact, we were trying to limit where the growth took place. Now, this issue of history that this county has had this is not a new issue. This has been going on for the last 20 or 30 years in terms of gross, net, and whatever. And so in past history, we have allowed development within the RPA if it was platted by this grandfather date of 2012. And so, in fact, the Chesapeake Board for the last couple of years has approved almost 30 different parcels to be developed that were 100% in the resource protection area. Now, why is that important? Well, it's an environmental issue. It's just strictly that way. And what happens when Mr. Haldeman was talking about these watersheds, the Powhatan watershed, which is Eastern State, Ford's Colony, all the way down to the James River, right now, with the level of development that we're looking at, is non-supporting in 4 of the sub-watersheds because of the development. And so, should a developer get credit to build a house inside a resource protection area on a steep slope? And the answer is no. Take the net for it. Now, one of the arguments that I've heard from the audience and from two of my board members, and in fact, I have been a very big critic of the fact that the county does not have an affordable housing policy. And part of that is because the development community in the state level has argued against the proffer to be able to have that, so that somebody would be forced, a developer would be forced to provide an affordable housing. Now, we can't do that. That's what the law is. But guess what happens in James City County? And every one of the residential developments ordinance that now exist, there can be a benefit to the county, of which one of those benefits stated is affordable housing. And so a developer can come in and offer to the county a benefit to the county of affordable housing. They could come in and offer extended buffering around that RPA for green space and get credit for an increase in density. So currently there are ways that a developer can get that. So in answer to your question, ma'am, in terms of what this means to you, you need to look at 2 things. Number one is how much land is either in an RPA or steep slopes that you own. And that land, underneath this ordinance that we're proposing here, you would not get any credit for being able to use that. You would have to take the net amount of it, not the gross. So if you have 200 acres and 50 of it is in an RPA, you're only going to be able to develop 150 of it. Now, if you wanted to put more houses on it or do something like that, you certainly come into the county and say, we're going to do something, a benefit to the county, and here's what we have in mind. We're going to put walking trails around that buffer area of the RPA of 100 foot, and we're going to make that available to everybody else, and we're going to do affordable housing. And you would be entitled to a benefit of that density. And the density levels are already laid out within the current zoning. So this issue that this is all going to stop affordable housing is just absolutely not true. The question is, what is the benefit to the county as opposed to the developer? And in the past, the developer has gotten away with a whole lot by developing inside that and impacting the waterways that we have. Now, the cases that I'm talking about are not something that's theoretical. I'm talking about at least 2 cases that we will probably hear in this year that will have this kind of an impact. And so part of this, in my mind, is to make sure that the county gets some benefit for the density that they're proposing, as opposed to take. And without an affordable housing policy, which I rue, this is the only opportunity that we have to correct some of these pieces for. So I intend to support it, and I'm sorry that you all didn't quite understand what these are. There was a hard thing for me. I mean, I really had to think about this a lot and then look at the implications for it. So hope that helped, ma'am. And with that,
we're now asking that the property owners who have, in many cases, been, farmers or otherwise been stewards of their property for these many years are now the ones who suffer the brunt of decisions that were made by prior planning commissions, prior board of supervisors. And, to your point, Mr. Polster, if we reduce the net developable acreage, I would argue that we probably can't create enough incentives to create affordable housing. So for those who have watched certainly the economic piece, steel, wood, glass, all those pieces are up 30% year over year for the last 2.5 years. So, to create opportunities for affordable housing, will remain close to non-existent. And by reducing the developable acreage, we're just saying we don't want it in James City County.
Well, I think there's other ways to get affordable housing.
Well, we don't
within
have
the
it.
county, and without a proper policy for it. And the county has the opportunity to take land, purchase it, and partner with the state and a developer to do affordable housing for 30 years. And we have several of those projects. Matter of fact, one of them is ongoing right now out there in Oakland Point, which is a teaming thing. And the interesting thing about that kind of an approach with the government is that for a developer, he has to put up 70% of the money right up front before he can ever see a penny. That model gets flipped off when you do it with the federal government and the state government, where he only needs to put 30% up.
Can we clarify?
And so anyhow, there are different mechanisms to get affordable housing, and it isn't just that way.
Can we clarify? Is Oakland Point actually
Yeah, they're under construction.
receive those credits?
Yes.
They're under construction, but they've changed the name, and so it's
Changed the name, but they have received those tax credits from the
Okay.
state.
Sure. Can I just add two comments? One, I just wanted to state that the existing density calculations, by including the step approach, does provide a little bit of a hybrid. It's not an absolute either gross or net. There is some middle ground for the residential districts, but if I can just take a slight detour and thank everybody in the audience for coming out tonight. During the comp plan, and realizing that that was during the COVID pandemic, we tried to accommodate through virtual meetings and getting feedback, but nothing is as effective as having you all show up. And too often, some of the residents in the county have the attitude that, well, if it's not in my neighborhood, I don't need to get involved. But you all came out here tonight and you got involved and you made your opinions known. And this is what I'd love to see for all of the land use cases that come up, because sometimes there's bigger issues, as you heard the discussion just amongst my colleagues here. And so it's not always just a black and white. There's a lot more issues that affect the development of the county. And so thank you all for coming out tonight.
Thank you, Rich. Any other comments or discussions? Mr. Haldeman.
I'd just like to remind everybody that there were 4 recommendations by the policy committee on this, and I'll just review them very quickly if I may. The A1 and R8 districts, which are primarily rural districts, don't use density calculations at all. They rely instead on lot sizes to determine density. And the policy committee recommended by a 2-to-1 vote that it stay that way, that we not make any changes. The R6 district also doesn't use density calculations. They rely on lot size to determine density, and the committee unanimously recommended that it stay that way. So again, no changes are proposed, at least by the policy committee. That doesn't mean the planning commission couldn't react differently. Number 3, the R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, and PUD, Planned Unit Development, and Residential Cluster Development Overlay District all use the stepped approach. That's the compromise approach to calculate density. The committee recommends by a 2-to-1 vote that the calculation should be changed to net density. This, and then number 4, mixed-use districts currently use the stepped approach. That's also an alternative compromise approach to calculate density. The committee recommended by a 2-to-1 vote that the calculation should be changed to net density. Economic opportunity districts currently requires that density based only on developable area, effectively a net density calculation, so no changes are recommended there. So the changes that are recommended by the policy committee are for the residential districts and the mixed-use district.
Thank you, Mr. Haldeman. Any more discussion or a motion?
We have four motions, Mr. Holt?
I think you've got a couple of options. So the ordinance, the draft ordinance that's within your staff agenda packets tonight has that net density calculation across all districts equally. It did not attempt to blend in or weave in the policy committee recommendations. And so, you know, one option for the motion could certainly be the draft ordinance as presented. So that would kind of be everything across the board. You know, if a planning commission member wanted to make a motion to do some districts and not the other, whether that's sort of consistent with the policy committee recommendations or some other variation than of, you can do that. We'll just want to make sure that that motion is very well articulated so that we can bring that forward to the board.
I give it a try?
So what I can offer is, and again, I'll look to our attorneys for advice, you know, if one concept is to make a motion for all of the districts consistent with the policy committee recommendations, I think that's pretty well articulated well enough in the policy committee minutes in the staff report that, you know, we could distill that up as an example versus having to go through each of the four subsets. But again, I'll leave that up to you all.
I will make a motion that we change the density calculations for residential districts consistent with the recommendations made by the policy committee at its February 23rd, 2023 meeting.
And again, that's articulated in the staff report, but really would be consistent with, I think, the summary that you just provided verbally here for the benefit of your colleagues. So let the colleagues discuss that motion.
To clarify, which ordinance would then be advertised and forwarded to the Board of Supervisors for consideration?
So without knowing which particular options or which ordinances that the board may ultimately decide to do, you know, what we did for Planning Commission is to advertise that change in each of the districts, because it's, you know, acceptable to not approve it in some circumstances, but obviously you can't approve something that wasn't advertised. So sort of advertised it all. Allow the PC and board to take those considerations into account.
I guess my question is, what's to be gained with that motion as opposed to making a motion on the ordinance as was included in our packet?
The ordinance that's included in the packet also changes A1, I think, changes A1 and R8 and R6 to net density. Do you want to do that?
It mentions net, but doesn't it say that because of the parcel size, it's more of a grammatical change than a functional? And I'll look to Paul for that.
Again, so every property is unique, every single development proposal is unique, and so I think articulating that language in there the most clear, rather than sort of assuming that's what it does and then getting some future development proposal where you may not ultimately get what the ordinance is requiring. I don't know that that would be the case 100% of the time on every new development proposal that may walk in the door.
My issue with like the A1 is if I have a 100-acre parcel and I reduce the developable acreage from 100 acres to 65 acres, and I'm 1 to 20, I get 3 homes, where at one point I used to get 33 homes. If I have an adjacent 25-acre parcel, I get 8 homes. So we have significantly devalued a larger parcel in A1 if we go through with it this way. I just think, and we're also talking about taking 400 feet of them away from them on the roadways, on Ford's Road and other places. So, I mean, how much are we going to keep taking from some of these parcel holders? So,
Isn't it true that what we were recommending was to exclude the A1 and R8?
that's not what the ordinance says, and it's not what's going to get
That's what-
advanced. It's not what's going to get advanced to the Board of Supervisors.
Excuse me, I want to make sure I understood that it was advertised for all the districts.
It was advertised for all of them, and whatever the planning commission's recommendation is tonight, that will be forwarded on to the board as well.
Right, but the planning commission has the ability to take what the policy committee voted on the R8 and A1, which already has the 1 to 20, and say that stays at gross.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it's 1 to 20.
That's what my motion,
was trying to
that's
do.
what I
That's
was.
what his motion was
that's
trying to
what-
say.
That's what I meant by my motion, was that we are, the draft ordinance does include verbiage to change A1, R8, and R6 to net.
Right.
But my motion is to change those 3, consistent with the policy committee recommendations, which is to leave them the way they are.
Okay.
And it's for the very reason that Tim's talking about.
For the very reason.
For the very reason.
Yep, that's exactly why I voted no
Right.
in the.
So my question is, will this draft ordinance be rewritten and forwarded to the Board of Supervisors, or will this ordinance go forward to the Board of Supervisors with our recommendation? And as I understand it, this ordinance, the way it's drafted, will be advanced to the Board of Supervisors, and although we have a recommendation, they can choose to ignore whatever we recommend. But it's a lot easier to recommend it when it's not in the language that's in front of them, and for people to, we've already had folks come in tonight and say, we don't know what you're talking about, so they're going to even know less of what we're talking about, which is why,
This ordinance is going to go to the Board of Supervisors no matter what we do, right?
Correct.
As
So,
it's presently
to-
written. So that's all we can do is make a recommendation to change it.
To make a loose analogy, the earlier ordinance amendment to make changes to the community recreation facilities, you all did not recommend approval of. That would still be advanced to the board for their consideration with your recommendation.
I agree with you 100% on the, that's why I voted no on the A1 R8 for just that reason, and at the policy committee.
So, Mr. Haldeman, I'll certainly defer to the commission members for more discussion and deliberation, but for that sake of clarity, might I impose again, now that there is a motion on the floor, to mimic the recommendations of the policy committee, could I please ask you to recapture those as part of your motion, and that way we'll be all the way clear in the minutes?
The A1 and R8 districts currently do not use density calculations. They rely instead on lot size to determine density. The policy committee recommends by a 2-to-1 vote that it stay that way. That is, that it stay gross. R6 district, the same. It does not use density calculations, relying instead on lot size to determine density. The committee unanimously recommends that it stay that way. R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, PUD, and Residential Cluster Development Overlay District use a stepped approach to calculate density. The committee recommended by a 2-to-1 vote that the calculation should be changed to net density. And then number 4, the mixed-use districts currently use the stepped approach. The committee recommended by a 2-to-1 vote that the calculation should be changed to net density. The economic opportunity districts currently requires the density based only on developable area, effectively a net density calculation, and no changes are recommended by the policy committee.
that's a motion?
And that is to elaborate on my emotion,
That's your
on my
motion.
motion, yes.
You consider amending your motion? Your motion?
Sure. I started to say emotion, I know.
Yes, no. I mean, would you consider amending your motion to not recommend approval of this ordinance as it written and follow on with the subsequent recommendation as you just outlined?
That was my intention, if I didn't say it,
Okay.
so.
I'm agreeable.
So let me read it back to you just to make sure
Read it
I'm
back.
clear and you all are clear. So the draft ordinance that staff prepared that's in your agenda packets would add a net density calculation to within each zoning district. Mr. Haldeman, as I understand your motion, the A1, R8, R6, and EO districts would not be changed. R1,
Excuse me,
R2,
would not be changed from the way they are now, not,
Correct.
not the way they're
Doesn't
written in
use
the draft.
net or
Okay.
gross, right? for the
correct,
EO.
that there would be no amendment to those,
To the EO,
to
right.
those districts of the zoning ordinance.
Correct.
Within the R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, PUD, and cluster, and mixed-use districts, the calculation to use a net density calculation would be added.
Yes, that's my motion.
So for the people out in the audience, okay, if you're an A1, which is outside of the PSA, it stays 1 to 20, period. The R8 is a piece of property off of the Parkway by the James City Church that owns a farm there, and that's the only R8 we have. And so they get to stay the way they are right now. So that's what that essentially means. Everything else in the PSA for the development goes to net.
Instead of stepped.
Right.
But just to clarify, that is what the recommendation is being made to the Board of Supervisors. They will have a public hearing in a month, you know, where they may go back to what the proposed ordinance is as it was included tonight. So I don't want people to walk out tonight thinking that what our recommendation is
So
final.
stay tuned. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Are we clear?
Yeah.
Call the roll, please. So vote for the motion.
Would be as articulated
Thank you.
by Mr. Haldeman.
In
Would be an
favor of?
aye vote,
An
yes.
aye vote.
Mr. Crop,
No.
Mr. O'Connor,
No.
Mr. Haldeman,
Yes.
Ms. Knoll,
No.
Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Motion does not carry.
So we now need another motion.
Not necessarily.
Nope. Well, we have a draft
to-
ordinance.
So I'm, again, going to get guidance from our, if we should restate the motion in the affirmative.
Let's
Can you give us-
restate the motion in terms of denying the proposed ordinance
Right.
in its entirety.
Want to make a motion to deny the proposed ordinance in its entirety, or to deny the proposed changes within the R1, R2, R3, R4, R5 PUD cluster and mixed-use districts, which was really the motion.
I think my motion would be to deny a recommendation in favor of ordinance 22-0003,
As proposed for all of the districts.
as proposed for all the districts.
Okay.
Your motion is to deny?
To deny.
Okay.
Which would have the effect of saying you all are, if the motion carries, it would have the effect of recommending to the board that no changes to any of the districts should take place, would be the recommendation at that point. Okay?
So that's what we're voting on. Okay.
So it would
To
be
deny
as
the
is
whole
today.
No changes would be your motion in recommending denial. Okay?
And a yes vote recommends denial.
Correct.
Yep.
Would be in support of the motion to deny.
We clear on the motion?
Okay? Mr. Crop,
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman,
No.
Ms. Knoll,
Aye.
Mr. Polster.
No.
Motion carries.
That was exciting.
I need the duct tape.
All right, moving on. Planning Director's report, Mr. Holt.
Other than what's been contained in your agenda packets, I don't have anything additional for this evening.
And that takes us to Planning Commission discussion and requests. Do we have any discussion items? Pardon?
I do not, no.
Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn to our 3 May meeting?
So
Motion
moved.
to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're closed.